Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 829. The Three Calamities, 2. Despite the changes that were happening around and the sudden expansion of the crack, Emmett remained completely unperturbed. Puff. In the silence that took over the surroundings, he took a drag of the cigarette in his hand. His movements were neither slow nor hurried, his eyes closing for a brief moment as he savored the taste of the cigarette. Eventually, he opened his eyes again, his mouth opening as he began to speak. There exists a total of 9 of them. The plume of smoke drifted in the air. Nobody knows their true number, but I know. I'm sure it's 9 of them. If I'm not wrong, there should be 8 in the future. 8? I thought for a moment before recalling something. Right, Noel and Panthea managed to kill one outer being. Emmett's eyes turned even hazier as he spoke. It was almost as if he was looking somewhere distant. He was both present and yet not there. What was he seeing? Eventually, his gaze regained some clarity as he began speaking again. Their goal is to trap us here so that we won't touch the source. They want to keep the source to themselves. Or at least that's how I interpret the situation. I am still not sure, but if there's one thing that I'm sure about, it's that power. Emmett paused, his hand moving towards his lips as he took another slow drag. This time, his hazy eyes trembled for a moment. His hand, too. It's not something anyone would want to talk about. It's contagious, addictive, and it's also the very root of this entire world, and the universe itself. Puff. They have eyes and ears everywhere. They have rooted their influence through every corner of the world, and mere words can arouse their attention. Even now, they are probably watching, listening. A hazy smile spread across his features as he looked towards the crack. Something pulsed from within, almost as if it was trying to warn him, but his smile grew as he flicked the butt of the cigarette in the direction of the crack. As he did, he looked back at me. Don't worry too much. They might listen, but not if I don't want them to. Emmett's eyes turned completely white for a split moment, a strange power surging from out of his body. The moment I felt the power, my mind paused as I was somewhat familiar with it, and I held my breath. Source. Not even a moment later, something seemed to shift around us. It wasn't noticeable, but I could tell. The gaze of the being behind the crack. It had shifted away from us. What sort of? I may be weaker than the current you, but my connection with the source is far greater than yours. In fact, it's incomparably better. Weaker than me? The thought shook me out of my confusion, but as I tried to ask about it, he began speaking again. Do you happen to know why the mirror dimension was created? His question made me pause. This question. I knew the answer to this question very well, but it seemed to be a rhetorical question as he continued speaking, not giving me a chance to respond. It's a prison. One designed to keep us locked in, never giving us the chance to escape. Even if we do break the shackles of the dimension, our bodies won't be able to handle the real world anymore. It's a well-designed prison designed to make sure that we can never escape. Even though I already knew the truth, hearing it spoken aloud, from my own mouth, made my throat go dry. If I said it's impossible to escape, then there really isn't a way to escape. I was someone who had seen everything. In that regard, when I said that it was impossible to escape, then it was true. That's when the 3 calamities come into play. Emmett continued, taking out another cigarette and lighting it up. Puff. Akern, Vorsail, and Lethrun. For a moment, the surroundings fluctuated. The crack that appeared in the distance pulsed, and a gaze hovered in our general direction. My heart paused at the sight, a certain sense of dread sweeping down my entire body. The already silent world turned even more silent. Not a noise, not a sound. A suffocating tension lingered across the surroundings as the gaze continued to hover around us. But thankfully, it didn't last long. It soon looked away, the crack pulsing in the air. Puff. With seemingly no care in the world, Emmett leaned back and took a slow drag of the cigarette. They're the architects of the mirror dimension, and the only ones capable of influencing the world itself. His brows knitted for a moment as he looked at the streets beneath. The source thrives on the existence and faith of all living things. It's the key to everything. Faith? MHM. Indeed. Emmett pursed his lips, his pale face turning away from the streets below and onto me again. Staring at him, I struggled to find the man standing before me to be me. I knew it was me, and yet, it also felt like a completely different person. He didn't look like he belonged at all in this world. The source is the true God. No matter which deity one chooses to worship, all faith ultimately flows back to the source, maintaining the balance. My eyes started to widen. The more conscious and self-aware a being is, the stronger the faith is, sustaining the source's balance. Taking such a life disrupts that harmony, and when such faith is killed, the source weakens. This is especially so if the beings have discovered a way to connect or touch with the source. Killing them would only lead to the weakening of the source. That's why we are imprisoned instead of killed. This is the real truth behind it all. I stood in silence, quietly absorbing the information. I hadn't really thought about it much in the past, but it all suddenly made sense. The reason why the outer beings trapped the gods instead of killing them, alongside the rest of humanity. It also became clearer why they had allowed humanity to rise again. The source required faith. It wasn't that they were being arrogant or looked down on humans, but rather that eliminating such a race would only mean they would become weaker, as the outer beings were tied to the source. But there was still something that I was curious about. What about the calamities? You haven't really given me a proper explanation. Emmett mentioned something along the lines of architects, only ones capable of influencing the world itself. But what exactly did this mean? It means what I said. Puff. Taking a slow and quiet drag, Emmett closed his eyes before exhaling all the smoke in the air. It's not easy to enter this world. However powerful the outer beings are, entering Earth is not a simple task. The only ones that are capable of achieving such a feat are the three calamities. Taking over the bodies of simple humans, they quietly infect their minds and bodies until they completely take over and create gates where they can step into the world and shatter the dimension from within itself, creating another mirror dimension. Puff. What makes them truly terrifying is that even if you manage to find the calamities, you can't stop them. The moment you kill their host, the outer beings simply move on, claiming another body. And once that happens, finding them again becomes nearly impossible. That's why, rather than fighting them, the goal is to contain them. That's the only thing we can do against them. But it isn't easy. It'll get harder the more they grow up, and their insecurities grow. I'm sure you've just experienced it yourself. Emmett's eyes turned even hazier as he spoke. It gets easier and easier to infect their mind. If you're not prepared, you might find the meter to fill to 100% in the blink of an eye. For a brief moment, his hand stopped mid-motion as he was about to take a drag of the cigarette. His eyes flickered, and his face paled. I knew in an instant that he was most likely experiencing a vision. No two. Or maybe more. They were endless, constant, and the reason why I'd gone mad in the end. But this wasn't something that I could stop. Instead, I focused my thoughts and attention on all the things that I just heard. A lot was starting to make sense. In particular, Evelyn's situation. Taking into account how the calamity meter had hardly moved in the past, but had gone up by so much with just this incident, it was clear time was running out. But still, it's a relief. This was the first time I had heard answers without needing to find them myself, after months of searching. But after hearing everything, I wasn't so sure it was a good thing. The only thing we can do is contain them? I thought back to the situation with Evelyn, and my heart sank. By now it was clear to me. I had used the visions in the future to figure out who the calamities were. Perhaps, through some arrangements, I had orchestrated certain scenarios in order to make sure that I was closer to the calamities and prevent them from awakening. The system quest was something I had arranged for this very specific reason. But this still makes me question the reason why I've been brought all the way here. I had used the third leaf right before Evelyn turned. This was a last-ditch effort that I had used to buy myself more time to figure out the situation. But what now? What was I supposed to do now that Evelyn was about to turn? If it went according to the words I had just heard, the world was practically one step away from complete ruin. I'd also be dead, considering the power that I felt. Something, anything, I needed to think of a way to resolve this mess. There's no need for you to worry too much. A voice echoed once more, snapping me out of my thoughts, as I found Emmett looking at me with the same hazy eyes as before. No, looking better, his eyes were even more hazy than before. They almost looked white. All three calamities must awaken for the next dimension to take form. Each one is essential to the creation of that prison, and... Emmett paused, his brows furrowing in apprehension as he muttered, "This time, it'll be a lot different from the past. It'll be a prison none of us will ever be able to escape, even if we try again." He took a deep breath, his trembling hand moving towards his lips as he tried to take a drag of the cigarette in his hand. only stopping once he realized it was finished. That was also the moment he said, "They have learned from their mistakes." Chapter 830. The Three Calamities. 3. What do you think is the best way to keep a person from escaping? It was an abrupt question. One that caught me off guard for a moment. But the answer, I more or less already knew in my mind. It's to make sure they don't have a reason to escape. Yes. A faint smile tugged at his lips as he looked towards the distant crack. What need is there for a prison when the prisoner believes they're free? Give them comfort, routine, even a shallow sense of purpose, and they'll never question it. They'll never seek the truth. And why would they? Because they don't believe they are imprisoned. Right? Emmett smiled once more, his hazy eyes turning a little bit clearer. They've learned from their mistakes. They understand what to do in the future. And that's why it's important that you don't fail your mission. I know. He didn't have to remind me. I was well aware of the situation myself. But that still didn't change the fact that I was currently helpless. No, I'm not entirely helpless. There was still the eye of Heraclius. If I use the eye, then I'm sure I can loop until I figure something out, but that will only delay the inevitable. That's not what I want. I need to get an answer before I am sent back to the future. The third leaf had a time duration. There was no specific reason for it, and as such I knew that I couldn't afford to waste any more time. I know what you're talking about, I said while looking at my past self. Emmett. Honestly, it felt both weird and right to refer to him like this, as if he were a completely different entity. I just felt so distant. I'm at a point where I'm struggling to contain one of the calamities. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that I've used the third leaf to come back to the past. I mainly came back to look for an answer or something, in order to figure out how to handle the situation, but instead, I found myself here. I'm still lost, and I have no idea how to solve it. Evelyn's situation merely stemmed from her emotional instability. But even though I had used my emotive magic on her, it seemed useless. Or at least it didn't have a great effect on her. It wasn't enough to curb the darkness that was building up inside her body and consuming her mind. Or at least this was how I thought of it. But you already have the answer. Emmett pointed at his temple, his hazy eyes focused on me. You may think it's not enough, but it is enough. Your emotive magic. That's the end of it all. But I tried. I frowned upon hearing the answer. It didn't work at all. It barely did anything to her. That's because her mind is currently closed off. You won't be able to get through her even if you wanted. Emotive magic is the end to it all, but not the complete answer to your predicament. Then, you'll figure it out soon enough. I'd much rather you feel it than I explain it to you. What? Baffled, I looked at my old self. I felt an immediate wave of something boiling in my chest when I saw the subtle smile on his lips, but soon gave up when I realized that I was no different. No, I am him, I sighed. Was I really this detestable? There's not much time left. Emmett spoke, turning his attention towards the crack in the distance. I should wrap things up before things start to get messy. Placing his hand over his neck, Emmett started to massage it. As he did, he turned his attention towards me for the last time. Remember this. He spoke slowly, making sure that I understood his words. The moment they mark you, it's almost impossible to escape their eyes and control. They can read your thoughts, hear your words, and even see your actions. The only way to prevent them from detecting you is by using the source or... Emmett paused, his eyes blinking slowly. By embodying and becoming a completely different person. A sudden flashback filtered across my mind. I feel like we're being watched. You're not wrong. They can read our thoughts. But only to those they've set their targets on. Learn how to act. Immerse yourself in the role. The world is now your theater. They are your spectators. Become someone you are not and hide your thoughts from them. That's the only way to slip past their gaze. But of course, don't lose yourself in that role. Suddenly, several things began to click in my mind. By becoming someone else, you'll be able to hide from their detection and move freely completely. Of course, that will also mean you won't be able to use your powers fully. A lot of your movements will be limited. But this is the price one must pay for freedom. Moving away from the side of the roof, Emmett turned his wrist and checked the time. There's not much time left. I can feel that you'll be brought away soon. Since that's the case, let me give you a little gift. Huh? I blinked. Then, something hit me. No, wait. Before I could react, he placed his hand against my chest and pushed. The instant he did, the world around me warped, twisting and stretching as though time itself had begun to unravel. Bang! By the time it all stopped, I smashed against something hard. Ugh! My mind throbbed, feeling as though I had been rammed by a truck. And when I came to, I found myself in a familiar place. It's the Ivinus mansion. There was no doubt about it. Everything about the place exuded refinement, from the meticulously polished garden paths lined with trimmed hedges to the towering mansion that stood at the center. Although a bit different, this was none other than the Ivinus mansion I was familiar with. "Stand up." A voice followed me a moment later. Looking up, I saw Emmett standing next to me, his gaze murky white as he fixed his attention towards the distance. I followed his gaze, and it was there that my eyes fell on two figures, a young boy and a young girl. Emmett didn't need to say anything as I activated Lament of Lies, and stood up from the spot, following from behind as we moved towards the two children in the distance. Hee. The soft sound of giggling echoed in the air. "I caught you." The two children smiled happily, playing alone in the courtyard as no other adult was present. Standing in silence, I turned my attention towards Emmett. He stared at the scene with indifference. But eventually he pointed at the young boy. "Don't get distracted. Look carefully at him." Frowning, I did as he said, but when I looked at the young boy, nothing seemed out of place. He looked like any ordinary child, carefree and lost in his own little world. "Just what? You're not looking." Oh. When I turned my head, Emmett pointed at his mind, and that was when I finally got an idea as I narrowed my eyes and used the 5th level of emotive magic. The moment I did, my eyes shot wide open. It looks like you're finally seeing it." Emmett's calm voice echoed from beside me as I took a moment to calm myself, focusing on the dark emotions that were slowly building up within the young boy. They weren't very obvious, but it was ever present. But that wasn't the part that shocked me. What did was something else. The more he's exposed to her, the more the darkness within him grows. It won't be long before the darkness consumes him. I didn't say anything. What could I even say? I had seen the darkness, even absorbed that very darkness. If this were true, then she's the source of his darkness. Emmett's words drifted slowly in my ears as he calmly looked at the two. But as he did, he soon turned his head in my direction. "But the reason why she's so close to him is because of me. I had asked Noelle to keep her close." "Don't tell me you're feeling bad for the situation, right?" Emmett looked at me closely. "What you're seeing is something that must be done. But there are other ways to keep her close." The words flowed out on their own. "Yes, there might be," Emmett replied, his gaze unchanging. "But this will just change the victim to another. There's no other way around it. The darkness is not something that can be contained. It will corrupt everything and anything that is exposed to it for a very long time. It's not much now, but it won't be long until the changes start to show. Which is why." Emmett suddenly raised his hand, a soft glow enveloping it as his eyes grew even murkier and a thin film spread across the two bodies. In that very moment, the darkness that was spreading out of Evelyn's body focused entirely on Julian. The small child paused for a moment, his expression twisting. It's best to have the corruption contained within one person. This body is also the most ideal for containment. You may not be aware, but the talent that this body has in emotive aspects is one of the best that exists. It's also the reason why I chose it. Emmett's eyes continued to stare at the little boy, whose face was starting to twitch as the darkness started to take over. He may never be able to tell due to darkness within, but I'm sure you, of all people, are aware. Only someone like him will be able to contain the darkness inside the body. Emmett's voice paused as he lowered his hand. The young boy stopped completely in that moment, his expression darkening as Evelyn turned to look in his direction. "Julian? What's going on? Why did you stop?" She looked worried as she moved towards him. But just as her small hand was about to reach for him, Julian's expression twisted. Smack! He smacked her hand away, glaring directly at her. "Get away from me!" "Heek!" Evelyn shrieked in fright. At that moment, the girl's expression changed as Julian continued to glare at her. At the same time, he raised his hand and was just about to smack her again when he stopped. Staring at her in silence, he turned away a moment after. Evelyn stared at his parting back, her eyes starting to water. And soon, Peta, tears started falling down her face. As this happened, Emmett watched all of this coldly. It was also in that moment that I realized what kind of person I had been in the past. My lips pressed together tightly. Chapter 831. Rating Food 1. Hick. Small whimpers echoed across the surroundings. A young girl sat alone, her eyes puffy as tears streaked down her little face. I stared at her in silence, unsure of how to react. This is starting to make more and more sense. In the end, the darkness that I found within Julian's body all stemmed from Evelyn. Having been exposed since a very young age, and with Noelle making sure that it was all contained in his body, it's only natural that he turned out the way that he did. In all honesty, I didn't know how to feel about the sudden revelation. I understood why he did this, but I also began to feel sorry for what had happened. I guess this was how I used to be in the past. I looked at Emmett. His gaze was cold as he stared at Evelyn. There was no trace of emotion in his eyes or body. He was almost soulless. It was the sight of him that brought certain memories to mind as I began to understand more and more the state of mind I used to be in. Back then, I didn't know what was real or what was fake. New visions would appear constantly. In those visions, I'd relive certain events and situations. The more I encountered them, the more I started to lose my sense of reality. I started to question myself and the world that I was in. Which one was my real reality? What was real? What was fake? Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of scenarios and situations constantly flooded my mind. The fact that I was still standing, even managing to speak, was a miracle in itself. It's no wonder I eventually died. It just wasn't sustainable. No, necessary. I wouldn't have been able to remain sane otherwise. Hic, hic. Hearing Evelyn's whimpers, I turned my attention towards her. But the moment I did, my expression froze. Thin black lines began to crawl across her skin, spreading slowly until they covered nearly every inch of her body, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. A sinister energy radiated from her, bringing a certain heaviness to the air, enough to make me shudder. Tension began to rise in the air as my body tensed. And soon enough, flick, her head turned in our direction, my entire body locking into place as I felt a shudder run down my entire body. I didn't dare make a sound in that moment, feeling her gaze sweeping over my entire body as my heart drummed loudly within my chest. Staring at the young Evelyn, I saw that her tears had stopped. Her expression was cold now, her eyes dark as she slowly scanned the area around me. She couldn't see me, but I could tell she could feel I was there. The thought made me shudder, but thankfully, Emmett was prepared. With a single swipe of his hand, Evelyn's expression froze. She sat still for a moment before eventually closing her eyes. Thud. She fell face first against the ground, the black veins around her body beginning to fade. It didn't take long for the sinister energy around her body to fade as everything returned to normal. I stared at the scene in silence, unsure of how to react. But when I turned my head to look at Emmett again, my breath paused. Or more like, I was gone. Oh shit. This was the moment when I realized I was alone. What am I supposed to do now? I looked around, trying to see any traces of my old self, but regardless of where I looked, he was gone. Deep down, I also understood that he wouldn't come back. He had shown me everything that needed to be shown and explained everything that needed to be explained. Taking a moment to calm myself down, I processed all of the information that he had shared with me. There are 9 outer beings in total. 1 was destroyed by Noel and Panthea, leaving 8 remaining. The 3 calamities serve as vessels, hosts for 3 of those beings. Once they become corrupted, they can open gateways between Earth and the outer beings, allowing them to reconstruct the mirror dimension again. Each cycle traps more souls, recreating a new Earth in the process before repeating. This was the best way that I could summarize the current situation. It was a sinister plan, and one that made my heart grow heavy. From what I understood, this new cycle that the outer beings were about to start was also going to be the most terrifying one. It was going to be one where the people trapped within it wouldn't even know they were trapped. I'm not sure if that's a good or bad idea. However, even if they do succeed in creating this perfect prison, I'm sure they're going to repeat the cycle. There's absolutely no way that there will never be a person who doesn't realize the truth. They probably know this as well, and will likely reconstruct a new mirror dimension every few thousand years. The thought made my heart grow even heavier as I fixed my attention on Evelyn on the floor. Her eyes were still closed, and the black veins on her face had almost completely receded. Seeing her frown in her sleep as her expression contorted with pain, I bent down to take a better look at her. I didn't know much about Evelyn. She wasn't someone that I interacted with a lot. Usually, she talked with Aoife and Kira. She had a sort of relationship with Julian, and she was also close to Leon. In regard to my relationship with her, I wasn't sure. I really didn't know, but staring at her, or more precisely, the subtle milky white membrane around her body, I finally found the answer that I had been looking for. Source. The only way for me to contain the darkness that was taking over her. Thinking back to the present that I was in, my heart sank. I knew that I didn't have much time, but how was I supposed to tap into this power? Not only that, how much time did I even have at my disposal? When was the 3rd leaf going to end? These thoughts weighed heavily in my mind as I scrambled to find an answer. But soon, MHH. A soft voice echoed. Evelyn's eyes trembled, and a moment later she opened her eyes. The moment she did, she looked around. Where am I? Her small voice was a little hoarse. She didn't seem to be aware of what had happened. even forgetting about the incident with Julian for a short moment. Staring at her, I grit my teeth. Eventually, "Hey!" I called out to her, shifting my lament of lies and turning myself into the smaller version of Julian. "Julian?" Evelyn blinked her eyes slowly as she took sight of me. The moment she did, as if memories of what had happened resurfaced in her mind, tears started to swell up. My lip twitched. "Stop. I'm sorry." I immediately apologized to her, taking out a napkin and using it to wipe her eyes. "I was angry. You were mean," Evelyn shouted at me, her small voice echoing loudly within the surroundings as she glared at me. I could only helplessly pacify her while wiping her tears. Yes, mean." She continued to shout at me while I could only reply with, "Yes, you're right. Sorry. I'm very sorry. I was tired. Sorry," and so on. At the same time that I tried my best to pacify Evelyn, I observed the murky white substance around her body. With each passing second, it started to fade, and I knew that it wouldn't be long until it would fade completely. No, I need more time. I could feel something stir within my body as I observed it. Having already tapped into the source before, I was familiar with it. As such, I just needed more time to learn about it. But, say sorry again. Evelyn was really making it hard for me to do so as she squirmed away from me. "You were mean. Should I just knock her out and study it?" The thought crossed my mind for a moment before I shook it out of my mind. I was just about to think of an excuse to pacify her when she suddenly proposed something to me. To make up for it, eat with me. I looked at Evelyn strangely. She glared back. What? In the end, I could only agree. With mana sense active, I was more or less aware of who was around and what was going on. I was also already aware of the fact that a certain presence had taken notice of me, and without further ado, I followed Evelyn back into the mansion as she brought me towards a private room where pastries and all sorts of food were ready. "Sit." Evelyn was in her young master mode, commanding me with a serious expression. It was cute. Okay. I sat before a large oval table draped in a white cloth. At its center rested a gleaming silver tray piled high with an assortment of pastries, their sweet aroma filling the air. Evelyn stared at it for a good minute, saliva dripping down the side of her mouth. Hurriedly realizing how unbecoming she was, she wiped her mouth before glaring at me. I looked away, pretending not to have seen it. Cute. Young Evelyn was certainly cute. But above all, I was growing more familiar with the murky substance surrounding her body. This isn't a power that can be understood. The only way to tap into it is by creating a direct connection with the source. I've already felt the source, but I haven't yet created a connection with it. The amount that someone can take and perceive from the source also depends on their understanding. Things were becoming increasingly clear in my mind. What Emmett had done, or to be more precise, what the previous me had done, was something that the current me could do. Perhaps not as well, but it was certainly possible for me to do it. Not only that, maybe the moment I get my blood back from Cithras, I'll be able to regain the connection that I previously had. My mind became clear from that moment. I knew what I had to do, and I wanted to immediately start. But, here, a pastry suddenly hovered before my very eyes. A soft voice followed. Eat it. Chapter 832. Rating food. 2. Eat it. The young Evelyn shoved the food in front of my face. The pastry pressed against my cheek, staining it with a little bit of cream. Eat it. I could tell that she was starting to get annoyed, and so, with a little bit of reluctance, I grabbed onto the pastry and took a small bite of it. Fucking sweet. I wasn't very good with food. By now, I was already aware of the reason. The switch in my body between me and Julian had made it so that I needed food to be bland and sweets to be too sweet. No, I was never good at dealing with sweets to begin with, now or the past. I wasn't much of a sweets guy, hence, how is it? Good. Tell me. July. Gulp. I finally swallowed the food before doing a thumbs up. Gee. Good. Although Evelyn was young, she could still see through my lies as she started glaring at me. I could only force another bit. But, PFTTT, I ended up spitting it all over her. The small Evelyn looked at me in shock, her eyes wide. I knew in that moment that I had messed up. Fuck. Sniff. Sniff. Hearing her stifled whimpers, I inwardly groaned. You. I don't like it. I eventually spoke honestly, taking out another pastry and handing it over to Evelyn. You try. No, Evelyn tried to slap my hand away, but I ignored it and shoved the food down her throat. Eat it. Tell me how it is. Evelyn's eyes remained wide, but the moment her tongue registered the food, her face started to relax as she bit down on it, her eyes furrowing for a moment before she gently slapped my hand away and savored the flavor slowly. It's good, she eventually muttered, taking a napkin to clean up her mouth. Not too sweet, but good. She looked to be giving genuine criticism. Is that all? However, I wasn't particularly interested. I was more interested in the white film that was covering her body. I could tell that it wouldn't be long until it faded, and I wanted to spend as much time as possible trying to understand it. Eh? There should be more. Of course. I carelessly answered, narrowing my eyes while trying to focus my attention on the power. You're not giving me enough description. You say it's not too sweet, but what about the texture? What about the other flavors? What's so good about this pastry? I'm not going to try it unless you give me proper details. No, really, the amount of bullshit that was coming out of my mouth was enough to make me speechless. But it worked. Evelyn's brows furrowed tightly as she leaned back against the chair, her small hand tucking at her chin as she started to ponder deeply over my questions. Texture? Not enough detail? Sweetness? Her eyes started to swirl as she struggled to understand where I was getting at, but I left her alone and closed my eyes instead. I'll wait for you to give me a proper answer. My vision turned dark. Within that darkness, I focused my entire attention on the murky white power that I'd managed to witness. Although faint, I've already felt a connection with the source. What is left for me is to establish a direct connection with it in order to utilize its powers. But I grew a little hesitant. I knew that the moment I fully created a connection with the source, the eyes of the outer beings would turn on me. I had managed to pass without any issues because I wasn't strong enough to warrant any attention, and my lack of connection with the source. But the moment I created that connection, it would mean getting their attention. Does this mean that I have to hide my thoughts? Do I have to create an entirely different persona like the other gods? The thought made me hesitant. Suddenly, I thought about all of the times I had participated in plays, and inwardly laughed. Perhaps there was more to it than I had initially thought. This might not be the case. I guess I'll have to figure it out as I connect with the source. That should be my greatest concern at the moment. I don't know how much time I have left, and if I go back to the present Evelyn, then I'm sure I'm just going to die. This was a race against time, and I was already wasting too much time. Whew! I let out a low exhale, drowning out all the noise around me. Thankfully, Evelyn was still busy thinking about everything I had said to her as I immersed myself deeper in my thoughts, trying to focus on the sensation I had felt in the past. Source. I had felt the source in the past, but never developed any further than that. It wasn't because I didn't want to, but because I had no idea how to do so. Thankfully, my past self had given me a pretty good hint as I tried to sense the murky power emanating from Evelyn's body and trace its origin. This step wasn't hard, but what came next was as long, thin white line appeared in my vision. It stretched all the way up, and I slowly guided my thoughts in the direction of the line. Calm. Remain calm. The sensation I experienced while doing this was unusual. My head felt light, almost as if I was floating, as the power started to thin with each passing second. And yet, it almost felt as though there was no end to this long line as I followed with my best of my abilities. The more I climbed, the more lightheaded I became. It was almost as if my entire body was starting to stretch, no, disintegrate as the surroundings shifted. The darkness felt different as I climbed higher and faster. Calm. Remain calm. I had to remind myself over and over again to remain calm, feeling stretches where panic began rising deep within my body. In such times, I knew I had to shut down all my emotions, as my mind felt increasingly uncomfortable. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I still remained stubborn. There was no other way for me. This was something that I had to do. And thus, clenching my teeth, I continued to follow the line as it thinned before my very mind. I could feel its presence growing thinner, and for a moment, the panic that I had managed to quell inside of my mind started to return. No, not yet. Just a little more. I could feel that I was getting closer and closer to the source. I just needed a little more time. A little bit more. Bah! Thump! A loud thump suddenly echoed in the darkness. Stopped me dead in my tracks. Bah! Thump! Bah! Thump! The beat continued this time. It was stronger than before. I could feel the surroundings starting to change, a sense of oppression pressing down on my mind as the space around me started to pulse. I started to feel small within the darkness around me, the space trembling further as something appeared to be trying to lock onto me. Seeing this, I knew that I couldn't remain standing still as I snapped out of whatever state I was in and continued to follow the thin white line that was thinning by the second. Although I saw no end to it, I could tell that I was getting closer to the source. But the closer I came to the source, the greater the pulse became. The thump. The sound grew heavier, echoing somewhere deep within the darkness. Each beat rippled through the void, twisting the thin white line before me. It wavered, shivered. For a moment I thought it would break. Then came the whispers. They didn't come from above or below. They came from everywhere. From inside my head. From the darkness. From the white line itself. Their voices crawled beneath my skin. My thoughts started to blur, my breathing turning ragged as I tried to hold on to the thread in front of me. It's them. They had noticed me, my presence. And the moment I realized that, the space around me started to twist. I could feel them. In all sorts of sizes, invisible beings that existed beyond the edge of perception. The surroundings squeezed my mind, feeling as though it was being pressed tightly by a hand. The thin line flickered again, shrinking beneath their presence. My mind began to strain. Every time I tried to focus, the whispers pressed harder, digging into me. Whatever words came out of their mouth, I couldn't understand them. No, it was more like my mind wasn't capable of comprehending them as it squirmed with each noise that I heard as they pushed against my thoughts, bending them, trying to overwrite them. For a second, I forgot who I was. I forgot why I was climbing. But it wasn't for long. I was quick to snap out of it. My mind wasn't weak. This much was something that I could handle as I continued to press on. The thin white line pulsed faintly under my will. I could feel my consciousness stretching thin, like I was melting into the dark. My body, my thoughts, even my sense of self began to blur. But I didn't stop. The more I climbed, the more the pressure was. The air itself seemed to harden. Every pulse echoed through the void, steadily pressing against me from all directions. But soon, I saw it. The subtle white mist in the distance as the line flickered faintly. I could barely see it through the haze, but I knew it was there. The source. The space around me shuddered. Shapes began to move in the distance. Shadows without form, bending reality wherever they passed. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel them. They were all watching me. The line trembled violently. The moment I reached for it again, something invisible grabbed hold of me. My mind was pulled down, swallowed by static and noise. The whispers turned into screams, the kind that I could make out with my mind as they shrieked loudly. Ach! I fought back, pushing every bit of my will forward. I used my emotive magic, calming my mind constantly as I continued to climb. This was the hardest part. I needed to get in touch with the source and establish a connection. The moment I did, I could use its powers. Drip, drip. I could feel blood running from my nose, even though I wasn't sure if I still had a body to begin with. Just a little more. The darkness cracked. Light spilled through the cracks, flooding my vision. The screams in my mind grew louder, pressing from all directions, but I ignored them. I continued to climb. Nothing could stop me. I wasn't going to let anything stop me. The white light washed over everything, searing my mind with a brilliance that felt both divine and unbearable. And then I saw it. A sphere of pure white, suspended in the center of the collapsing void. It didn't glow. It didn't shine. Simply was there, a presence that erased everything around it. The outer beings began to move. The pressure crushed down on me, tearing through every defense I had left. But I could also tell that this was their limit. They couldn't stop me even if they wanted me to. Something was preventing them from doing so. And soon, I reached for the source. My fingers flickered, dissolving into light as they neared the sphere. The voices crashed over me again, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. Almost. I reached forward, the last of my strength burning away. But soon, my fingers brushed against the surface of the sphere. At that moment, the world froze. Sound vanished. The darkness vanished. Even my thoughts vanished. Only light remained, one that blinded me entirely. And from somewhere within that light, a small voice echoed. Eat it. Evelyn's voice. When I raised my head, a small pastry appeared before me, a little hand pushing it towards my mouth. The texture is soft, but not too chewy, which is good because it doesn't get stuck in your teeth. The cream isn't too sweet, but it has a really nice taste that makes the whole pastry feel fancy. I think it's balanced, like something you eat at an important place. She nodded several times, looking satisfied. 6 out of 10. Her small voice pulling me out of my daze. This is my rating. Chapter 833. Runes 1. I sat in a daze, staring at Evelyn, at a loss. She stared back at me, her head tilted curiously. What? I blinked before swallowing. You just. 6 out of 10. That is my rating. Evelyn repeated, her brows furrowing. You don't agree? She almost looked as if she were threatening me. I could only scratch the side of my face before shaking my head. No, I think you are right. You're correct. I was merely saying this to appease her. My thoughts were more preoccupied with what I had just gone through. Was I successful? Did I establish a connection with the source? I wasn't able to remember much from the situation. In the last moments, my mind was blank. All I could recall was the numerous voices that I couldn't make out and the strong sense of rejection that I felt from them. It took everything from me in order to even get close to the source. In the end, I wasn't even sure if I had managed to reach it. Let's try this. Evelyn picked another pastry. This one looked to be filled with cream as her eyes glinted. She must have liked cream a lot. Munch. Taking a bite, her eyes lit up. For a moment, it almost looked like she wanted to scourge the entire thing with one big bite. But as if recalling that I was present, she straightened her small back and started to eat it more elegantly. Nod. Nod. With a couple of nods, she put the pastry down. Not bad. She said this whilst saliva dripped from the corner of her mouth and her eyes remained glued to the pastry. Yummier than the other pastry. So soft. And the cream is super sweet. I liked how it felt in my mouth. I think this one is the best. Yes. I give it 9 out of 10. Evelyn looked excited as she gave the final score. I could only stare at her silently. Or more precisely, keeping my attention and focus on the thin white film around her body. This time I could see it better. I could also feel the connection more strongly. It was also through this observation that I came to realize something. Runes. Indeed, the white film wasn't just a formless white hue. There was much more to it, and when I looked at it carefully, I could see the numerous runes that were contained within it. There were a few runes that I was unfamiliar with, but there were also runes that I was more familiar with. They were runes that were used in most of the spells that I had learned, and while I hadn't paid much attention to them, I had a rudimentary understanding of them. The source is connected to the runes? No, it would be more accurate to say that the regular spells are somewhat connected to the source. Perhaps, to some extent, spells are an extension of the source, but more like a rudimentary extension. My thoughts began to shift as I gained a deeper understanding of the world. It's not wrong to say that everyone has access to the source. However, those who connect with it are different. They are the ones who are capable of using spells to another level. In this regard, I can think of the source power as a more complex way of controlling mana. One that is a lot more powerful. The more I thought about the source, the greater my understanding became. The source power was truly just a more complex spell mechanism. Then, in order for me to improve on it, I'd have to put more focus and attention on runes and how they worked. Yes, it has to be that. For the first time in a very long time, I started to see the light at the end of the very dark tunnel. I finally had something to work with. Why are you not answering? A cold voice woke me out of my thoughts. All of a sudden, I felt a biting cold pierce through my skin, and when I raised my head, a pair of dark eyes met my vision. Why? Why? WHE? Why? +1. +1. A strong notification appeared simultaneously. I'm back. It took half a second for me to figure out what was going on. And the moment I did, it suddenly felt as though the very air was being squeezed out of my lungs. Why yes, I'm definitely back. Why did you do this to me? You're the one who is responsible for everything. I need to kill you in order to make sure that it doesn't happen. Yes, I need to kill you. Evely's eyes turned dark, and even more notifications rose in my vision. I knew that she was moments away from completely awakening. Seeing this, the back of my mind tingled as I looked at her. If I didn't act quickly, I knew that I was going to end up dying, and as such, without even thinking, I closed my eyes and tried to tap into the connection that I had formed with the source. Unlike before, I didn't need to look for it. I knew exactly where it was, and the moment I did, my eyes snapped open. This should work. It has to work. Why are you? I lifted my hand, and a magic circle flared to life before me. As a sharp sting shot through my eye, the world around me began to slow, every motion dragging into stillness. I was never one to pay close attention to spells and their structure. While I did understand them, my main focus had always been emotive magic. But despite my lack of knowledge, I still had some understanding. Spells were divided into 5 categories: beginner, intermediate, advanced, superior, and perfected. Each spell had a different number of runes. Beginner 12 runes, intermediate 18 runes, advanced 24 runes, superior 30 runes, perfected 40 runes. A spell contained 3 rings, with each layer defining a part of the spell's nature, the outer ring shaping its structure, the middle ring dictating its function, and the inner ring establishing its identity. Each layer held its own significance, inscribed with distinct types of runes. There were 3 in total: flow runes, proprietary runes, and modulation runes. These were the main components that made up a spell. At least this was how things used to be. But now? There's a 4th type. Source runes? Outer runes? I didn't know what the name for those types of runes was, but I suddenly started to get a better understanding of the system. I finally realized how my spells were being upgraded. Looking carefully at the spell in my hand, I could see the presence of a couple of runes I hadn't been able to see in the past. These runes were inconspicuous, but I now knew that they were the main reason why the spells had been able to upgrade in the past. This meant that, so long as I get a better grasp of the runes, I can upgrade all the spells myself. Maybe, there's even a chance I might be able to upgrade them to a level beyond perfected. The thought made my heart race, but I knew that I couldn't waste any more time. The spell in my hand readied in a matter of moments, and with my mind fully concentrated, I began to inscribe a new rune within the inner ring. The process was quick. In fact, the entire sequence of events was extremely quick. Because of my lack of mastery of this matter, I could only force whatever I knew into the spell. I had no choice. This was all that I could muster in the little time I had. Raising my head to look at Evelyn, my eyes started to sting even further, the mana inside of my body sapping as the entire world slowed down even further. But I noticed rather quickly that Evelyn was starting to move quickly within this slowed down state as her head turned to stare at the magic circle in my hand, her dark eyes flickering for a moment before she turned her attention back to me. The spell squirmed, several white hands emerging from around Evelyn as they tried to embrace her from all directions. She stood motionless, staring at me with her dark eyes. Ba, thump, ba, thump, +1, +1. The beat of my heart, the continuous notifications, the slowed down world. In that moment, it felt as though Evelyn and I were the only people existing in this world. I stared at her as she stared at me. The white hands shot out rapidly, closing in on her at speeds that the naked eye couldn't follow. But even that wasn't enough. Evelyn's eyes darkened even further, the notifications finally coming to a stop. Then, swoosh, the hands were swept away, and a deep darkness enveloped the surroundings. It was a darkness that I was familiar with, one that made every hair on my body stand on end. But it was too late. Rumble, rumble. The world began to shake. A terrifying pressure took over the surroundings, forcing me to my knees. I struggled to breathe as the air ripped apart. A figure, if it could even be called that, stood behind the narrow crack in the air, its gaze fixed directly on me. I tried to focus, to make sense of what I was seeing, but the harder I stared, the more my mind recoiled. My eyes registered something there, yet my brain refused to process the shape. It was as if the sight itself slipped through my thoughts. Impossible to grasp, impossible to understand. It was trying to make its way into the world. Shit! I knew then that there was nothing that I could do. That the moment it stepped into this world, regardless of what I did, I'd be unable to escape its influence. And thus, with a bitter smile, I pressed my hand against my temple and, killed myself. Why? A voice shook me out of the darkness that had taken over my vision. A familiar environment greeted my sight, followed by a powerful burn that nearly left me breathless. Ha! Ha! Taking a couple of deep breaths, I wiped the sweat from the side of my face. I failed. Lifting my head to look at Evelyn and seeing the numerous notifications that were appearing in my vision, my heart sank. I can do this, right? Chapter 834. Runes 2. How do I get past this? I could still feel the cold sweat on the back of my shirt. Thinking about what had happened in the moments prior, the back of my shirt was soaked with even more sweat. I had never intended to use the eye. The cooldown for the skill was too long, and unless I had no choice, I never planned on using it. However, it was obvious that the situation I had found myself in required the use of such a skill. Had I not used the skill, then why? Overhearing Evelyn's voice and seeing the string of notifications in front of me, I knew that I had to come up with something quickly. This is all your fault. Why are you always stopping me? I drowned out her voice in my mind. What went wrong? I started to ponder over everything that had happened. The key to solving the situation was the outer runes. That I knew. However, that power was a lot more complex than I had imagined. Just carelessly integrating it into a spell was not enough to stop Evelyn. I had to do more. I need to get a better understanding of the outer runes. No, I need to gain a better understanding of spells in general. My current knowledge is holding me back. This was the painful truth of my current situation. My lack of knowledge. It was for this reason that I was struggling to integrate the runes properly. Thankfully, I now had time to FO. +1, +1, +1, +1, +1. Huh? My thoughts came to an abrupt halt. Lifting my gaze slightly, I stared at the numerous notifications that appeared before my very eyes. They, +1, +1. Why is it so fast? Looking at Evelyn and seeing the black veins tracing across her face, my heart sank as I started breathing harder. I couldn't understand what was going on, but I knew that the situation was unfolding differently from before. +1, +1. In less than a minute, she had already crossed the 90 mark. The changes in her body and the surroundings were becoming increasingly evident. What is going on? Why is it rising faster than before? I knew that this wasn't the time for me to be panicking. Panicking would only make things more difficult for me. As such, taking a deep breath and curbing my emotions, I started to assess the situation more logically. My eye started to burn. The pain was intense. So intense that I had to stifle a groan. Soon, the surroundings started to change. The darkness that had once taken over the surroundings returned. It was just as suffocating as I last remembered, my breathing growing so heavy that it felt as though I was desperately clinging to each breath. No, that was exactly what was happening. And soon, crack, the air started to split. The same presence that I had felt before was once again making its way into the world. Once more, my mind refused to process what was before me. Even though it was unable to process its image, it could still process something else. That was when I realized. It's a war. Hawk! A scream tore from my throat as agony seared through my eye, sharper and hotter with each passing second. It was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It was scalding, as if molten lava were being poured directly into it. My hands flew up instinctively, clutching at my face as the pain consumed me. Ugh! That was also the moment that I felt it. Thump! Thump! The strange pulsing sensation coming from my eye. Thump! It was almost as if it were alive. But more than anything, with each pulse, the pain only seemed to grow. It started to reach a point where it felt unbearable. To make matters worse, the crack behind me continued to spread, its jagged lines crawling wider with every passing second. The presence seeping through it grew stronger, heavier, each moment amplifying a dread so deep, I couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. It's coming. It's coming. I knew that I had to do something quickly. However, the pain was making it impossible for me to think. Ach! Ach! Spit flew out of my mouth, falling into the darkness beneath as my eye continued to pulse. Thump! 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 With each passing second, the pulsing quickened, my throat growing hoarse from the pain as I tried to make sense of the situation. What is happening? My body felt locked in place, as though an invisible pressure had been placed on me, preventing me from moving. I knew that the situation was bad. If I couldn't move, then, thump, arc, another scream ripped out of my mouth. It was louder than the past ones, and the pain nearly made me faint on the spot. It was also then that I finally realized why I was suffering so much. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The soft, raw, wet crunch of my skull as it began to give way. I felt my eye shift in its socket, tugged by an invisible force clawing to pull it free. That was when I finally started to understand what was going on as I looked at the crack in the distance in horror. It's tearing to take my eye away. I could feel my connection with it starting to fade, and I knew that if that were to happen, then I wouldn't be able to return to the save point. No, even if I were to return, I was certain the outer being would just make Evelyn turn in a heartbeat. Was fully aware of everything that I was doing. My heart sank into the deepest parts of my stomach as my skull cracked further. The pain once again invaded my mind, nearly causing me to faint once more, but gritting my teeth, I kept my hands over my eye as my mind scrambled to think of a way out of the situation. Even now, I was trying to use the threads to kill myself, but my mana appeared to be completely sealed. There was nothing that I could do. Thump. Uck. KH. But it was hard. The pain was something that I struggled to deal with. Even when I tried to seal all of my emotions, I found it hard to think. The crack in the distance only grew in size, and the presence made itself known more and more. By now, I had completely lost sight of Evelyn. I didn't know where she was or what she was doing. There was so much to think about and no space for my mind to think. 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 I couldn't even rely on my surroundings. My mana was sealed. No surroundings to rely on. I was alone. The only thing that I had left was emotive magic. But what could emotive magic do? It didn't work on Evelyn. It surely didn't work on the outer being. Veeler? Where was he even? What could I do? There was no way for me to... My thoughts came to a sudden pause. Thump. Even with my skull throbbing once more, I didn't react. I clenched my teeth, not even thinking about it further. Without wasting a single second, I muttered inside my mind. Anger. 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 Sadness. 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 Disgust. 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 I didn't hold anything back. With my hand clamped over my eye, I threw everything I could into creating numerous tags that were attached to my head. The process was quick. By the time a second had passed, I had already created over 100 different tags. But, the pain only grew in that moment. Zero crack. My orbital bone started to shatter, blood seeping out of my eye as I lost the ability to see. In that moment, I felt something hot on my hand, and I knew that it was the eye. It was about to leave my socket. No! I didn't hesitate. The instant I felt my eye slipping from its socket and my connection to it beginning to fade, I unleashed every tag at once. There had never been a time when I had done this to anyone. This was the first time I attempted something like this. Killing, through emotive magic. And the moment I released all of the tags at once, my mind blanked. Everything just stopped. Wapaya! Light flooded my vision. Why? A voice followed after. Why do you always go against me? It was one that I was familiar with. Lifting my head to look at her, I blinked slowly. Couldn't move nor could I react. I just blinked. Why are you not talking? Answer me. A scream followed, but I couldn't react at all. I didn't know how to react. At this very moment, I felt incredibly numb. My emotions, couldn't feel them. My thoughts? I blinked once more. Everything was hazy. Bang. Even when I felt a powerful force spread onto my chest, I didn't react. PFTT. Even when blood flowed out of my mouth, I didn't react. +1, +1, +1. Even when the notifications in my vision were appearing every second, I didn't react. I didn't know how to react. I just didn't feel anything. It was almost as if my brain had stopped all complex thoughts. The only thing I could focus on was the snow around me. It was cold. And without even thinking, I just casually looked at my arm and reached for it. It was almost instinctive. Before the meter reached 100, before my mind turned completely numb, before I died, I found myself pressing onto the first leaf. The world shifted once more. A large wheel appeared before my very eyes. It was a really familiar wheel. Staring at the wheel, I blinked once more. That was also the moment that the wheel started spinning. It had been a while since I had seen this sight. Staring at the wheel, I closed my eyes and waited for the sound to stop. By the time I opened my eyes again, the wheel had stopped. I looked at the pointer. Love. Chapter 835. Runes. 3. Joy. Sadness. Disgust. Anger. The wheel continued to move. Turned before my very eyes, switching from one color to another. Eventually, it started to slow down. Disgust. I stared without a word. It wasn't that I didn't care about the result, but it was because I couldn't think about anything else but my current situation. It's aware. The outer being was aware of the eye and what I was doing. It wasn't like with Exahurl, where it was also aware but couldn't do anything about the eye. This time, things were different. The outer being was acutely aware of what I was doing and was actively trying to stop me from doing so. I had barely managed to escape the first 2 times. I knew that it was impossible for me to escape the third. This was my last resort. My last choice. The wheel slowed down further. It went from disgust to anger. It felt that it would stop at anger, and I prepared myself for what was to come. But just when I thought it would be the case, the arrow moved a little bit further, stopping at a pinkish color. Love. I didn't react upon seeing where the arrow had stopped. No, it was more like I couldn't react. My mind was numbed from the aftereffect of my previous actions. However, my train of thought was still there. Love? How is that supposed to help me in my current situation? I knew that the thing that I needed to do at the moment was focus on improving my current mastery of the runes. Enhancing love would. This isn't good. If the situation continued like this, I was certain I wouldn't be able to get what I wanted. However, it was already too late. The surroundings changed a moment later. Looking around, I found myself in an apartment. One that I used to call mine. It's exactly the same. I looked around, brushing my hand against the coarse texture of the sofa in the middle of the room, and grabbing the cup that rested on the glass tabletop next to the sofa, I pursed my lips. This was extremely realistic. But what exactly am I supposed to do? Suddenly, I noticed something. Turning my attention to the wall opposite the sofa, I spotted a mirror. There, I could see my reflection in it. I've never had a mirror like this in the past. I calmly walked towards the mirror and reached for it. Cold. That'd be how I'd describe the mirror. However, other than that, it looked like a regular mirror. I frowned. I could tell that the mirror was linked with the current situation. However, I soon pulled my hand away and moved towards the sofa. Whatever the case was, it was good this way. Since I don't know what the end goal is, and since time outside is not moving, I can focus my entire attention on understanding the outer runes. This was my only shot at getting out of the situation. Lifting my hand, a magic circle formed. I stared at the 3 layers of the ring, quietly staring at all of the runes in place. At the same time, I started to think about everything that I had learned. The outer ring is comprised of flow runes only. They were the runes that determined the movement of a spell, how fast it gathered power, how cleanly it circulated, how violently it erupted, and so on. They were essentially the main structure of the spell. Proprietary runes were the ones that were found in the inner ring, and they determined the function of the spell. Elemental? What type of element? Ignis? That was fire. Aqua? That was water. Lastly, there was the inner ring. This ring was made up of modulation runes, which helped establish the identity of the spell in its direction. Piercing, size of area of effect, shape, and so on. Each rune had its own distinctive importance in the creation of a spell, and if something went wrong, the entire spell would shatter. It was also for this reason that I struggled so much at the start. I guess it makes more sense now. One couldn't blindly unlock a spell. They needed to understand the runes and their function. Without a proper understanding, the only outcome was the shattering of the spell. Especially since certain runes couldn't coexist. I see. I played around with the magic circle in my hand. I began altering its inner workings. Hands of Contagion. This was an advanced type spell. The number of runes it contained was 30, and its shape was fixed. The rune that established its shape was the Manus rune. What was set to happen if I were to change that? Furrowing my brows, I began to tweak the spell. This process wasn't exactly hard. With just a little bit of concentration, the rune shattered. That was the moment that I inserted a new rune in its place. Serpents. In the instant that I inserted the new rune, the spell stabilized once more. Not even a moment later, the surroundings began to change as green snakes appeared in all directions, coiling over the sofas, chairs, and even the lamps above. I stared at all of this indifferently, my feelings still numb from before. But soon, crash, the spell in my hand shattered, the snakes fading alongside the shattering of the spell. Drip. Red stained the wooden floor a moment later as I felt something wet drip down my nose. Rubbing my sleeve over my nose, I looked down to see the red stain that had appeared. My head started to feel light a moment later. I guess it's not that simple. The spell had worked. Of that I was sure. However, it was clear that there was some clash with some other rune in some other area of the spell. I didn't know what it was, nor was I interested in knowing. My main goal at the moment was to find a way to handle Evelyn. The answer was the outer runes. Of that I was certain. However, from the simple experiment I had just carried out, I knew things wouldn't be simple. I had to truly give it my all. But just as I was about to continue, bang! A loud bang shook me out of my thoughts. Lifting my head, I looked towards the source of the noise, and it was there that I found myself staring at the mirror opposite me. A reflection of me stared back. "You're a hypocrite." The words flowed out of my mouth on their own. The moment they did, I paused. These words, they weren't the things that I had meant to say. In fact, I hadn't meant to speak at all. Something had clearly controlled me and spoken for me. But at the same time, I didn't feel much at all when the words came out. Hypocrite? Yes, indeed I was. This was something that I had long been aware of. I presumed this must be the test of the wheel. I had faced many trials, and was aware that each one was different. I still didn't know how this entire will thing had been created, but I knew that it had been something that my past self had created in order to aid me. How should I proceed next? I focused my attention on my hand once more as a new magic circle formed. It was a different spell this time, one that was a lot less complex. Shackles of Alacantria. None of my spells was complex. In fact, they were all around LVL2 except for Hands of Contagion. I really did neglect my spells. I calmly analyzed the new structure in front of me. It was a lot simpler, and as I looked at it, I imprinted the runes that were present in each layer. Once I was done with that, I moved on to the next spell, doing the same thing. I did this in order to memorize the structure of each spell properly. This was so that I could have a better understanding of what worked and what didn't. Having neglected spell class? Or to be precise, having been missing for almost my entire time at the academy, my knowledge regarding spells was rather lacking. It was only now that I had finally started to regret my absences. But it couldn't be helped. The circumstances made things the way that they are. There was no use crying over spilled milk. I continued to focus my attention on the spell in my hand. The picture was clear in my mind. As of right now, the spells are unable to contain the power of the outer runes. What I need to do right now is upgrade my spells. I think I should be capable of doing that. I didn't know how it was possible in the past, but I'm much clearer about the process now. What I needed to do was insert more runes into the rings, and connect them using the outer runes to make sure the spell wouldn't break. Sounded easy, but it was extremely difficult. This much became obvious to me after the first couple of failures. "You're shit." Once again I paused. Lifting my head, I stared at the reflection in front of me. It stared back at me wordlessly, not saying a single thing. Those words, they were once again said without my consent. I knew that whatever this was, it was part of the trial that I was undertaking. However, quickly shaking my head, I dismissed what had happened. I didn't have the time to pay attention to this. The goal at the moment was to create or improve my spells in a way that I could somehow calm down Evelyn. I kept thinking back to the spell that I had seen from my past self, and I wanted to find a way to replicate that. But before I could even start, my lips moved on their own once again. I don't like myself. The words made me pause, my gaze lifting to stare at the mirror. What's it trying to make me say? I was quickly realizing that the words that the mirror was saying weren't random. What was it trying to achieve? Was it trying to put me down? Perhaps there was more to it than that, but in my current state, whatever word was coming out of my own mouth, it had no effect on me. I could hardly feel a thing. Or so I thought. Drip. Feeling the warm streak running down the side of my cheek. The spell in my hand shattered, my expression slowly beginning to change. It was also at this moment that I started to feel them again. My emotions. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.